From Sophie Skelton watching her on-screen parents' iconic Season 1 argument to Hughen and Catriona Balfe's thoughts on the house blowing up in Season 7, here are Outlander scenes that broke our hearts and the cast's reactions to them. Long before the couple figured out their feelings for each other, Jamie and Claire went through several rough patches in Season 1. Fortunately for us fans, we got to see their on-screen daughter Sophie Skelton's reaction to their legendary argument from Season 1. You see, back then, Outlander was still establishing its world, so instances of sexism and misogyny, even from the characters we now know and love, were fairly common. For instance, remember when Jamie saved Claire from Blackjack Randall? He later demanded an apology from her for getting herself captured.
I'm waiting for you to say something. Anything that approaches an apology.
I mean, he didn't know what victim blaming was back then, but that's still no excuse. Even Claire let him know how unfair it was to demand apologies from someone who got abducted, claiming that she only went for a walk with no plans of getting taken away.
You think to punish you, I went for a walk in the woods on the chance that some British soldiers would be going by?
But it seems like that was the last straw for the Highlander, who told her a wife has to obey her husband's commands. Yikes. At that point, Skelton said that it was such a big red flag for Jamie, one that called for immediate divorce.
Oh, you think I'm your property, don't you?
You should file for divorce at this point.
But as the fight continued, Claire told Fraser he didn't care about her as long as she warmed his bed, and also dropped an F-bomb along the way to prove her point. Oh boy, did Jamie have a bad reaction to hearing that. The Highlander grabbed her and called her a foul-mouthed bitch.
You bastard!
You foul-mouthed. You don't speak to me that way!
Clearly, the Brianna actress wasn't a fan of Fraser's words, saying that she hated them because of how piercing they were. Of course, as fans, everyone was on the same page as her, watching their favorite on-screen couple fight with a heavy heart. Luckily, Fraser's anger turned into love in the later seasons, leaving us with one of the most heartbreaking scenes in the show, where he had to say goodbye to his love, protecting her and their unborn child from the war. You see, a big part of the second season of Outlander was about Claire being pregnant with Jamie's first child, a baby they'd come to call Faith, who sadly didn't survive too long. After dealing with something so devastating, Fraser knew he couldn't take risks anymore. So when Claire got pregnant the second time with Bree, the Highlander said goodbye to his wife, sending her back into the future to keep his family out of harm's way from the war. Claire, of course, couldn't contain her sadness, desperately clinging to Jamie. Fraser, on the other hand, the stoic man that he is, stood firmly by his decision, telling his love that if he had to go through 200 years of purgatory, he'd gladly accept it because all his sins were worth it for Claire.
If I have to endure 200 years of purgatory, 200 years without you, then that is my punishment.
I mean, as far as the two characters knew, this could have been the last time they saw each other, so the Highlander was making every word count. After all, Jamie wasn't losing just his wife, but he was also losing his child. Man, Fraser has been through the worst things imaginable in the series, but nothing compares to the scene where he's getting tortured by Blackjack. The whole thing was so disgusting that even Sam Heughan felt disturbed by it. You see, Jamie was being held captive in Wentworth Prison, and Claire, being the ride-or-die wife she is, tried to break into his cell, attempting to get her husband out of there. As romantic as the gesture was, Beauchamp ended up getting caught, giving Randall leverage. He eventually agreed with the Highlander that he'd let his wife go if Jamie kept his word and stayed in the cell willingly. I mean, Randall just makes your blood boil, doesn't he? Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of Fraser's nightmare, as the redcoat impales Jamie's hand on a nail right in front of his wife. But the truly grotesque scene came after that, making Blackjack one of the most disgusting villains in fans' eyes. Yes, I'm talking about the assault. It was insanely graphic and caught everyone off guard. No wonder Heughan himself thought the scene went too far. He later revealed that the scene was more explicit initially, involving even more nudity than we saw, but since he got uncomfortable, he asked the director to take some of it out. I mean, no one wants to stay around a disgusting scene like that for too long, so it makes sense how Heughan felt about it. Honestly, Outlander has no lack of intensity, because the characters can go to unreal lengths for their love. Like, take the scene where Claire tries to save her wedding rings from being robbed. You see, in the harsh world the series takes place in, it almost feels like no good deed goes unpunished. So when the couple let Stephen Bonnet go, since he seemed nice enough, they didn't know that he'd break into their house to rob them in the middle of the night. Now, when Bonnet was looting the couple, he set his eyes on Claire's wedding rings from both her marriages. But in a desperate attempt to save them from Stephen, she put the rings in her mouth and tried to swallow them, even successfully managing to gulp one down. But Stephen grabbed her by the throat and forced the remaining ring out of her mouth, escaping with it. After breathing a sigh of relief, knowing Claire wasn't in danger, fans were in store for a sad realization. You see, when Claire puked the ring out, it turned out that the ring she swallowed was Frank's. She'd lost the ring Jamie gave her forever. It was a devastating scene for the fans cause, throughout the show, the ring had become a symbol of the couple's love for each other and all the trouble they went through to be together. Safe to say, fans' souls were crushed by the moment. Let's be real. Can the two ever catch a break? Poor Claire had to go through more torture in season 5, and the details got even darker when Katrina Balfe gave her 2 cents on the scene. You see, the scene saw the time traveler being violated by multiple men, and all at the hands of Lionel Brown, who had taken her captive. Even though the scene was horrifying as it is, Catriona Balfe, who plays her, talked about what the character was really going through. Apparently, the whole 1960s sequence is an imagined reality that Claire is dissociating from, trying to get away from the pain of the assault in real time. She explained that in the start, her character was being written with a lot of dialogues, but in her eyes, the character was dialed way back into either saying no or calling out to her husband for help, since that's what Claire would be doing in reality as well. Even though the scene is horrifying to the audience, Balfe said, filming it was thankfully not the same, since her crew was very protective of her on set, and Ned Dennehy, the actor who plays Lionel Brown, was a complete gentleman about it, but she couldn't deny how hard it is to get into character for a scene of such gravity. And you can tell by her expert acting just how dark a place Balfe had to go to in her head, cause, according to her, it was really important to get the right point across to everyone about how terrifying it was that Claire had to create an emergency mental safe space for herself, truly making the show hard to watch for the fans. Speaking of safe spaces, Season 7 saw the destruction of our beloved home for the leading family, getting the actors emotional. You see, Wendigo Donner, another time traveler, was tearing the house apart looking for gemstones to travel through time. But to get some more light in the room, he lit up a match which came into contact with some ether, causing a huge explosion, tearing the beloved set to shreds. Even though fans were bummed out, turns out the cast was even more devastated. Balfe said that her character had just parted ways with Brianna, and she was already dealing with a lot of pain, so having her house, along with her dear lab, blow up was not gonna be easy to cope with by any means. Even Sam Heughan got a bit sentimental, saying it was sad seeing the set that they'd called home for years go up in flames. After all, Claire and Jamie made so many memories at this very location, so it was hard to say goodbye. Geez, if it wasn't enough for the show to pull on our heartstrings, even the cast has to make us cry. So, from Heughan and Catriona Balfe's thoughts on the house blowing up in Season 7, to Sophie Skelton watching her on-screen parents' iconic Season 1 argument, these were Outlander scenes that broke our hearts and the cast's reactions to them.